Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So good to see everybody. Good morning, good morning.
Oh, there you are. Hi, Rabbi.
Good morning, good morning. How is everybody doing? How is everybody's Hanukkah? Good. So why don't we thank God for the gift of learning Torah together, and then our colleagues will be getting on, and then we'll get started. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. So good morning, and we are today finishing our study of People of Dead Jews. We're going to be looking at chapters 11 and 12. As you know, chapter 11 kind of deals with a double issue. It deals with the Jew hatred of William Shakespeare and the Jew hatred of 16th century England, from which Shakespeare wrote the play Merchant of Venice. And then it deals with, and that's a 16th century issue. And then it also deals with what she calls gaslighting. And I've never really understood the term gaslighting, but she uses it, and I think I finally get it, which is to say that the proper thing to say if you're a Jew is, oh, that's not anti-Semitic. Shakespeare would never be anti-Semitic, that it's nuanced and it's refined and it's layered, it's not anti-Semitic. And that if you think it's anti-Semitic, then you're whiny and vulgar. So kind of a double issue on Shakespeare. And then she kind of puts that to the test by having her son, who's 10 years old, who's very smart and takes no BS. And he just says, Mom, that's just anti-Semitism. That's just Jew hatred. What's the issue? And so I want to talk about chapter 11, then chapter 12, of course, which deals with, it's the third chapter of the 3 American expressions of anti-Semitism that were lethal, including the case of the attack of the rabbi in Muncie. And she talks about the treatment of that in mainstream media and the context that is provided. And so there's that concerning chapter. She offers an explanation of why this uptick in anti-Semitism. And then she closes the book with her response, her prescription, which is Torah study, Daf Yomi. So what I wanted to do was to kind of talk about those last 2 chapters on their own and the points of connection, what you think of her treatment of Shakespeare, what you think of her treatment of what happened to the Hasids in the New York, New Jersey area. Want to talk about her explanation of why anti-Semitism seems to be on an uptick now, and then devote the rest of the class to her prescription. Do you think whether you think that her prescription is healthy and sane and helpful? So let me just begin by summoning reactions to Shakespeare. And by the way, who is our host today from our Holy Temple? So I can thank that person. Joan is
it's Sean today.
Sean, thank you for hosting. Sean Sander, thank you so
pleasure.
much for hosting. We're
Happy
grateful
to.
for your being here. Okay, what did you guys think of the Shakespeare chapter? Anyone want to offer any general reactions to Merchant of Venice? Either just the treatment of it. Did anyone? Okay, I'll ask a more granular question. Did anyone know the stuff about the 16th century context from which Shakespeare wrote it? About the execution of this Jewish guy who was, who was disemboweled and castrated and burnt, and they're just like hang the Jew, kill the Jew, burn the Jew, all that stuff. Did anyone know that? I did not know that. So did this book, we all encountered Shakespeare in our earlier lives, or maybe even today. Did this book change your thinking or deepen your thinking about Shakespeare and Merchant of Venice? Anyone think she's off? Anyone think, this is just a whiny, vulgar, obsessive? Or do people think that she was actually onto something here? Anyone? Linda Leffert and then David Kopelman. And Linda, if you can unmute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
probably one of the less serious scholars of Shakespeare than a lot of other people here. I mean, of course, I read it a long time ago, but I never majored in English or anything like that. But I can say that was a surprise to me, that particular description. If it was in the materials that I read way back when, I think I would have remembered. So that was shocking and new. And I did think that you had to really be the thing that I think of as an analyst, like a pretzel to try to turn and, to try to explain how all of that was not in any way anti-Semitic. I don't know if I don't think it's just because I'm Jewish. I think it's just a ridiculous description of trying to, just listen to the 10-year-old boy. They say out of the mouths of babes.
Right. And Linda, what you say is so relatable and real. I mean, nobody wants to think Shakespeare is a Jew hater, right? So we twist ourselves into pretzels to say, oh, the great Shakespeare could not be heir to this ancient virulent hatred. But the great Shakespeare was heir to this ancient virulent hatred. And the dot of Shylock, Jessica convert. Everyone, Shylock is humiliated. Everyone is laughing at the Jews at the end. It's a happy play. The Jew is downtrodden. All right, it's horrible. And we're so, it also says so much about us and our own security and our own insecurity that we don't really want to acknowledge what's just plain and in front of us. So I found that her chapter doubly helpful in that way. David Kopelman, and then I also would love to get voices who disagree. David Kopelman, and then I'll get Annette Miller.
No, I give Dara Horn credit for calling it out. It's pure anti-Semitism. And, there is a tendency to, I think today in the woke culture, to excuse anti-Semitism, to give it a free ride. And I give her credit for saying, I'm not going to be in awe of William Shakespeare. It's pure anti-Semitism, and I'm going to call it out. I agree with her. And I think that she was brave enough to do it. But then again, England has a long and infamous history of anti-Semitism. It didn't end with that Dr. Lopez being drawn and quartered. It continued with the blockade of Palestine, the turning away of ships of Holocaust survivors, the British failure to vote for partition in the UN, the anti-Semitic remarks of Jeremy Corbyn. And it's kind of curious that I think I heard, I could be wrong, that the only country in the Middle East that Queen Elizabeth never visited was Israel. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I just think England has a history of anti-Semitism before Shakespeare and after Shakespeare.
Yeah. Thank you, David. Annette, your hand was up. And if you can unmute, please, Annette.
My hand wasn't up. Good morning.
No, Annette Miller. Annette Miller. And Sean, can you perhaps help unmute Annette Miller?
So for some reason,
great. Now you're unmuted, Annette.
Okay, fine. Hi.
Annette Miller.
So I have a, I was in this play, and it bothered me every night that I was in it, and I felt tremendous sympathy for Shylock. So I think we have to think about doing this play, which he did right, and I think it's hard to say that he wasn't part of that anti-Semitic culture. I never knew. I knew about the doctor, but I never knew about the disemboweling. I mean, I never heard of that ever. And I think I'd like to bring that to the attention of our founding director, Tina Packer. But it does depend on the interpretation. And the last three interpretations, the one I was in, and the one I saw Al Pacino in, and the one I just saw at the Arlequin Players did, really point out the anti-Semitism. It's, including the one I was in. So no one was laughing at the end of Shylock. We show that culture for as awful as it was. There was a taunting that was done in the show that I did. The most touching scene was when they throwing Jessica's robe was being thrown around between all the people in Venice, and his father was trying to catch it. It was just a brilliant scene. And they ended the play with the singing of the Kol Nidre, that he's singing that in the back of the outdoor theater that we did it in. So the question is what to do with this play. You know, it is one of the canon. It is the most done play of Shakespeare, and it's done by Jewish companies.
Why
So-
and that? Why is that? Why is that? Why is Merchant of Venice the most done play of Shakespeare?
Well, because of all, and it's considered a problem play. Because I think, I mean, it's been done interpreted that it took place in the concentration camp. Alvin Epstein did a piece where he played Shylock in, it was in a concentration camp. The whole thing took place there. So what does I have to find out what cities it's played in all over the world, let's say. I mean, I think it's played in big cities where there are a lot of Jews. I don't know if it's really played in Podunk. That would be interesting to see too, and how it's interpreted. So I think the interpretation is very important. It is part of the canon. There, you know, does not a Jew, I really learned from that child's interpretation of does not a Jew have eyes, if you prick us,
Right.
do not bleed. Because I had not ever thought of it in the way that the young boy heard it. And that was interesting. And I'm not sure most people do. And I don't allow that to excuse Shakespeare at all. You know, I think he gives him that one little speech, but he is showing a very anti-Semitic culture. The way I have seen it is that this is a very anti-Semitic bad culture.
Right.
Okay. That's how I have interpreted every time I have seen it. Okay.
Right. And what's different about this chapter is we expect the Soviet regime to kill Jews, Jewish artists. You know, we expect Nazis to kill Jews. That's, you know, that's what they do. That's who they are. That's how they roll. But what's different about chapter 11 is this is Shakespeare. This is Shakespeare. This is the canon of the Western Foundation and foundation of the Western canon. And this is not like the corrupt Soviets or the Nazis. This is Shakespeare. And he writes something that is just, and if you believe Darahorn's context, and I find it, I mean, I'm not an expert, I just read the chapter, but the influence of the Dr. Lopez mutilation, castration, group, kill the Jew thing on Shakespeare, it's just disgusting. And to think that Shakespeare would write that is really problematic. So I guess here's my question to you, Annette. Let's imagine that you're not an actor. Let's imagine you were a theater director and you were making the call.
Yeah.
Would you choose to produce Merchant of Venice?
Yes, I absolutely would, because I just saw it done, because it shows the anti-Semitism.
Okay, then let me roll down.
Anti-Semitism is loud and clear in how it's done. It was even shown in the Al Pacino version, which was, there were some problems with it maybe, but the anti-Semitism was so loud and clear that you really did see how bad that culture was.
Well, let me ask you this question.
What they do with it. You have to understand, you can't change his words, but a director makes a lot of choices in all of the editions, so that before the conversion, the New York show had 3 hoods. The same judges come roll up their sleeves, hefty looking, muscular guys, roll up their sleeves. There's no words, there's no nothing. You just see them taking Shylock and dunking him and baptizing him in this water that comes up with all kinds of steam, and that scene is there, no words. That says something about henchmen. That says something about that culture. And that was taking place, they did that taking place in Wall Street. Okay, so that to show, when I say Wall Street, in the moneyed culture where Shylock lived in today's world. Okay, and so you saw that very present. And so, yes, I would do it to show the anti-Semitism. And as I said, the Arlington Players just did it, and it's devastating. You know, ART did it. And I found that it makes, you think now it's true. I'm seeing it with a whole lot of other Jews in a big city. And we can discuss it. And I think that's okay. I do, depending on the interpretation.
Well, one last question, Annette, and then I'll move you off the hot seat.
No,
You're the producer of a film series.
yeah.
Would you show Birth of a Nation and the glorious rise of the glorious Ku Klux Klan? Or would you say that that's just over the line? We're not
Well,
going
I want to tell you, I don't think you can compare Birth of the Nation with Shakespeare's words. Shakespeare is a poet. And there are some, wonderful lines of poetry. There is no poetry. The visual in the Birth of a Nation, yes, which does show how terrible anti-Semitism is. And I certainly wouldn't want that shown. I'd be curious to speak to the Reverend that we were with, where he wanted shown in his parish. But I don't compare them. I really don't want to deny Shakespeare's language. And I also think that if you interpret it, once you had that final scene, the way we did that final scene, there was no way you could walk away without feeling the struggle of Shylock. Not being on Shylock's side, without seeing that disgusting society that he was part of. That's
thank you, Annette.
I wouldn't compare it to Birth of Nation.
Okay. Any other responses to chapter 11? Anybody else want to say something about the Shakespeare chapter or her son? Anything about chapter 11? Anybody who didn't like it, who didn't care for it, who disagrees with it? We'd love to hear your voices. And if I don't see you, if I'm missing you, feel free to send me your desire to speak on the chat. And I would love to hear anyone on chapter 11. Okay, chapter 12. And by the way, I want to talk about chapter 12, then I want to talk about what's the commonality. I read this like she hit me over the head with a 2x4. And you could tell me if I'm overreading or misreading it. But before we get to the commonality between 11 and 12, let's talk about chapter 12. Chapter 12 is not only the murder of Jews in the tri-state area, but it's also the reaction and reporting on those horrible attacks and murders in mainstream media that the people in this screen read. What the Washington Post had to say, what the New York Times had to say, the newspapers that we read. She has a whole take on that. So I would love to hear people's reactions to chapter 12. And did anybody, what did you think about it? By the way, this is a woman who has spent her life thinking about anti-Semitism, and just to frame it, she writes that this is what kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, that this is what made her give up. And what made her give up, was, she writes about it, the context giving in the Times and in the Post, where basically it's okay for Blacks to kill Jews. It's okay. We understand it. We understand it. Context. Jews, they're Jews. They're running into their neighborhood in ways that one would never do, as she reported it out in the case of murder of Latinos, or the murder of gay people in Pulse, or the murder of Black people in the Charleston shooting. No one would say, well, we understand the whites were feeling squeezed or the non-Latinos were getting squeezed. But the word squeezed occurs in the context of Jews in Black neighborhoods, even though the shooters didn't actually even live there, et cetera. And that was just so, the hatred of Jews was so deep and now intuitive, like breathing, that it wasn't as crude as Shakespeare, and it wasn't as crude as the Soviets. It's on page 1 of the Times. They would never say, we understand why this, white supremacists kill Black people. We understand why the shooter killed Latino people. We understand why the shooter killed gay people, they would never say that. They'd lose their job. But we understand why they killed Jews. They're chassids. And that just broke her spirit. And I wanted to surface that with you and see, did you think that was an overreaction? Maddie Donoff.
I didn't think it was an overreaction, but I thought it was a bit of a cop-out. I was very disappointed that she said that she didn't think it was worth her while to write an editorial. And I think that she expressed so clearly what bothered her about it. And I couldn't understand why she didn't have the courage to write that in an edit. I don't know whether she was waiting to publish a book, but she certainly could have very, very well articulated the feelings that she had. That the media made all kinds of excuses for it based on infiltration of the Hasidic community because they were priced out of Brooklyn or other, ridiculous reasons. It was an out and out hate crime. The two Black men that were caught didn't live anywhere in the area. It didn't affect their life and their community. And they were specifically looking for people who looked, the Hasidic Jews who looked different. And as I said, I was disappointed that she didn't have the courage to write such an editorial. And I don't know what the people felt about that.
Yeah. Did anyone think that her discussion of context in chapter 12, that she was off there, that she was being uncharitable to our fine newspapers? Or does everyone on this call think she has a point? And in which case, Houston, we have a problem. Not Houston, we have a problem. America, we have a problem. Humanity, we have a problem, because there is a deep acceptance of the legitimacy of killing Jews that has infiltrated the New York Times and the Washington Post, and what she says is true. Anyone think that this is a misreading of the context? Okay. Here's my question then. What did you see as a common denominator between the Shakespeare chapter and the Jersey City chapter? Because to me, it was just so obvious and I thought so artful. What did anyone see a commonality between what was going on in 16th century England and what was going on in 21st century York, New Jersey?
Absolutely.
Anyone?
Yeah.
Annette?
Yes. Am I unmuted?
Yes, you're good.
I did see a commonality. I mean, there was just no question about it. For me, this underlying that was and accepted. If the New York Times or Washington Post, there seems to be an acceptance of, well, that's the Jew, that's the Hasid, that's what they're doing. We all know what the Hasids look like. We all know, aren't they funny, and aren't they? And even their own people don't always like them, feel they're, taking over too much. So I did see a commonality and therefore a warning. It's hard. We're such a big nation and such a small part of it that it's hard. We try very hard to make our voices heard. The ADL has been marvelous, all of us, but it's very difficult. And right now it's getting more difficult to get that voice heard about anti-Semitism, because it's immediately put with Israel and immediately with the oppressors. And so everything gets washed away.
Right.
In this other greater hubris. So yeah, I do see a tremendous similarity and a very unfortunate one.
Maddie? Thank you, Annette. Maddie?
You asked the question about context. I think she over-exaggerated the issue of context, that it was exclusively to the way anti-Semitic issues are reported. I think that the press tends to become psychiatrists and psychologists and try to figure out the reasons behind things and give it a whole other life that is necessarily the case. Perhaps they do it more in the cases of anti-Semitic acts, but even in this horrible thing that just happened in Michigan, all of the figuring out and machinations around it. It's part of the way the news is presented these days. And I think it does take away from sometimes showing us just the absolute real facts that are there.
Mm.
I don't know
Well,
how other people feel.
one of the points that she makes in the Shakespeare chapter, it feels like it also applies in the Jersey City chapter, which is that cartoonish depictions of Jews are just other, Jews are just different, Jews are just other, leads to violence against Jews. When you depict Jews as other, when you depict them as medieval creations, then that invites ridicule of them, and then that invites violence towards them. And that was certainly what happened with Dr. Lopez and then Shylock. And then that's what happened with the Hasids. They're other, they're different, and it invites somehow a permission. I felt that was the thesis of these two chapters and the close of the book, which is how you present Jews directly connects with an invitation to violence against Jews. By the way, in Boston this summer, about a mile from the shul at the Shiloh House, again, you have a Hasidic looking Jew who is stabbed 8 times. That there's something about being othered and caricatured and made the depiction of cartoons that with the big nose and all the medieval burlesques that to Annette's point also occurred during the media blitz after the Hamas war, during and after the Hamas war, all of those medieval cartoon tropes that invites violence. And that was I felt one of the significant concerns in that in commonality of that. Let me ask you about her. She has a subtle explanation for why now, and it's subtle and simple. Why this anti-Semitism uptick now, right? In other words, before 3 years ago, you could walk. It's kind of striking how much the world has changed in 3 years. Before Pittsburgh, anybody could walk into Temple Emmanuel, Ward or Ashford, doors unlocked all day long, right? There was no fob, there was no lock, there was no security guard. That was just 3 years ago. That wasn't 100 years ago. And and that's unimaginable now. But doors open, wide, literally wide open. For years, doors open was kind of the visual, the optic, the iconic image of Temple Emmanuel, doors wide open, anybody, any day, 7 days a week. And how much the world has changed since Pittsburgh and then San Diego and then the tri-state area. Her explanation, anyone want to offer her explanation for why the world has changed so much for Jews in America in the last 3 years? What did she say, and do you buy it? Anybody? Please, David.
Yeah, I don't think the world has changed that much, maybe in degree. But I mean, anti-Semitism can start with small rumblings and then turn into an earthquake. I mean, I remember Jesse Jackson's presidential campaign when he referred to New York City as Hymietown, pure anti-Semitism, or Al Sharpton's remark during the Crown Heights riots, more anti-Semitism. And today you have in Congress, I think it's Rashida Tlaib, or one of them said, the police officers that killed George Floyd were trained by the Mossad, and that Ilhan Omar's remark about it's all about the Benjamins. I mean, that anti-Semitism is there, and sometimes it just reaches a crescendo. And by the way, in terms of attacking the Hasid, I don't think the Hasids got attacked because they look different. I think that someone wants to go out and commit an anti-Semitic act. They're not sure with the way Jews have assimilated in America who they're attacking. They often make mistakes, but they know there's no mistake made when they attack a Hasid. They know they're killing a Jew. And I just think that this is something that has always existed. It's now accelerated, and maybe the new anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism, anti-Israel.
Thank you, David. Hannah Meyer, and I still want to just kind of articulate Dara Horn's theory of why now, why so intense now. I want to get that out there, but Hannah, you had reached out, so I'd love to hear your voice. Hannah, if you can please unmute.
Yes,
Thank you.
for so many years, the Holocaust loomed over everything, and people were so horrified by the Holocaust. But now it's been so many years and people don't remember it. They don't have the firsthand knowledge of it anymore. And so they've forgotten it. And so anti-Semitism has kind of reverted into what it's always been, the scapegoating of a minority people. So the thing that I thought was confusing about that, I mean, I think, you know, there's certainly a lot of validity about that. And I think when they take polls, there are a lot of young people that never even heard of the Holocaust, but, you know, that speaks to their educational levels. But in the chapter that she had about the Auschwitz exhibit, she was negative about having those exhibits and allowing people to go into those exhibits and feel sorry. And I don't know, it seemed like, you know, those exhibits encourage empathy. And she was negative about that too. And the learning that would go on for many people when they saw that exhibit. So the juxtaposition of those two things was a little bit confusing for me.
Great, thank you, Hannah. So let's unpack that. There's a lot to what you said, right? Why now? Why so intense now? Her explanation is that actually the intense anti-Semitism that we've experienced in the last 3 years is normal. That's normative. Look at Jewish history. By the way, for those of you who read the Netanyahus, that's kind of 1492 equals 1942. It's just always been that way. That's the line from the Haggadah, B'chol dor v'dor omdim aleinu l'chalatenu. Every generation, they're going to rise up to kill us. And she would say that that is the norm. And then the Holocaust happened, and the Holocaust was so unique that it shamed people into muting or trying not to be anti-Semitic because of the Holocaust. But now the Holocaust, she writes, is ancient history. It's like so long ago. How many survivors are there left? Most people don't know about the Holocaust. And it's as the Holocaust recedes into ancient history, she writes that the norm reasserts itself and that the norm is Jews are hated. That's her simple and subtle explanation. The Holocaust recedes, anti-Semitism comes back to the fore. Hannah is then raising the question, if that's the case, why was she negative on the Auschwitz exhibit in the previous chapter? And I thought that her posture on that, Hannah, was a bit more nuanced. She thought that the exhibit was actually a good exhibit. They got a lot of the points right. And she supports the education about the Holocaust. But her critique was that it sets the bar pretty high, that if something's not the Holocaust, it's okay. Like, you know, that Chassid, that rabbi in Muncie was attacked and somebody died from a machete. Okay, it's not 6 million, it's just a few people. And so some Chassids were attacked in open daylight in Brooklyn. Okay, so or in New York, it's okay. I mean, it's not great, but it's not the Holocaust. And that perversely, the Holocaust is now used as, this is her critique. I don't know if it's true, but that's her critique, which is if something does not rise to the level of Holocaust, then it's okay. If there's a swastika in Newton Center, it's bad, but it's not the Holocaust. You know, that kind of thing. And I don't know how to sort that out, but that is her point. Do you think that she's onto something when she explains the uptick as relating to the fact that the Holocaust is receding as a cultural shaping force? Do you think she's onto something? And if not, do you have any other explanation why there have been 3, sets of florid attacks of anti-Semitism in our country in the last 3 years? Any other voices on that? Linda Leffert.
Well, I don't think it's totally, I think it's something to consider. I think it's more complicated than that, but I definitely think that the passage of time and, saying, it's, blacks are getting killed, other people are getting gays, transgender are getting killed, so Jews are getting killed, how much worse is it than what's happening to all these other, having been in the unique situation, because like 6 million is a lot of people.
Right.
But that was then, people who, many people feel, how long are you going to feel guilty for something that you weren't even born when it happened?
Right.
So they're not, they're not saying that it's good, but, and then sadly, if you look around the world, it's got a lot of competition for bad things being done
Right.
about people for religion. In fact, and it's true to some extent, even among the Jews, even different sects of Islamic religions hate one another, like what's
Right.
going on with, and with on Sanki, or, whatever her name is. A lot of Jews are not happy with the ultra-Orthodox. They've made things very difficult in Israel. I know somebody who just
Right.
made Aliyah, and his daughter made Aliyah years ago. And when they founded the country, they chose Orthodoxy because it seemed like that's clear what that is. Once you get into past that, are you going to do reconstruction? So you're going to do,
Right.
and it became a big problem. They had 10 kids, and they didn't want to go to the army, and they didn't
Right.
they wanted to study. You know more than I do. So I think it's the issue has, and it's sad because part of it is what's happened in the rest of the world.
Right.
It's
So
not,
Linda, that's going to be a good pivot to the last piece of our class, which is,
not the big
so-
thing anymore.
yeah. So she describes, this is 12 chapters of harrowing, horrific stories of anti-Semitism. I've not read any reviews that said that what she describes is not true. They're all true. It's horrific and true, and 12 chapters, and it covers, ancient civilizations, current civilizations, historic civilizations, and our own civilization. And then at the end of chapter 12, and Linda, for no extra charge, will throw in your context that the whole world is a hot mess. It's not just that there's hatred against Jews, but that there's so much hatred all over the place. We're not even talking about the refugee problem of resettlement and Afghan and displaced peoples. Like, the whole world is a hot mess, and it's a hot mess for Jews. Okay. She focuses on the Jewish piece, but Linda, I accept your point of context that it's tough out there for everybody. Now the question is, and she devotes the last half of her book to what's a healthy response to that, and what's a response that gives you a hope, because one of the motifs and tropes of this whole class has been, what's the point of writing a book that is going to sink us into a deep depression and inspire us to never want to leave our house, right? You can't, any teaching, to be a decent teaching, can't just be a drag. It can't just be a drag. It can't just be the world place. There has to be uplift, even though she says in Jewish literature and Yiddish literature, there's often not uplift. But I think we Americans, we want some uplift. I mean, I remember Rabbi Chill telling me this years ago. You can't give a sermon where you just say the world is a terrible place. You have to give a sermon that creates some hope at the end. And that's why our national anthem is called The Hope. So her hope. What did you see her hope being? Her story ends with hope. What did you interpret her hope to be? And does it work for you? Anyone? I'd love some new voices. What was her hope at the end? Paul Kalis.
I really can't answer that, but I do want to go back to chapter 11. Despite the fact that Shakespeare has beautiful prose and beautiful poetry, there is no reason why Jews should support an effort that is negative toward Jews. And I am not saying that we should limit free speech. What I am saying is, why can't Jews on their own, without advertising, boycott? I'll say it again, boycott, not buy tickets. The plays which portray Jews so negatively as Merchant of Venice, or support art organizations that present plays that create even more anti-Semitism? Or should Jewish actors act in plays that create more anti-Semitism? This is not a group thing, each individual person.
Okay, well, Paul, thank you. I think you've identified a very lively issue. It's beyond the scope of what we can finish up now, but a sign of a great book is one that raises more questions than you can answer in a single class. So I think that is a great question, Paul. And I leave it to, maybe at some other point we can unpack that. But thank you for that question. That's certainly a question that emerges from chapter 11. I want to come back, though, to the end of chapter 12, because we're nearing the end of our class and the end of our discussion of the book. I wanted to give some very real time. I can't end this study with everyone in the ditch of despair that the world hates Jews and have a good December. It can't be that way, right? So the question is, how do you face all the honest history with a posture that is still strong and hopeful? And I want to end on that. So Cheryl Levin, did you want to respond to that? What was her response, and do you like her response? Cheryl.
I personally found it uplifting that she turned internally to study. And for me, this book wasn't, the previous sessions, people had commented that the book was depressing. How do you say that when, if you know anything about Jewish history, it's been one country after another of exile or pogrom or destruction. So this is not new news, but to me, there's a silver lining to anti-Semitism, which is a reappreciation and internal looking, whether that's students at universities who are receiving anti-Israel sentiments, they'll maybe cling stronger to their Jewish identity. And I find that a good thing.
So Cheryl, so she talks about Daf Yomi, the daily study. And as you remember, when she describes it, and I remember this moment in the Jewish story very clearly, because it was contemporary. It was us just a few years ago, that there was the rally against hate, and pretty much simultaneous with that, there was the Daf Yomi celebration at Met Stadium on New Year's Day with 90,000 people. And she talks about how she was glad that she was able to miss the march against hate. She had carpool duty. So marching against hate, didn't feel to her like an inspired response, but Daf Yomi did. And then she talks about how she's studying now the Talmud every day. Her mother-in-law is studying the Talmud every day. She writes about how, number one, there's strength in learning with other people on a contemporary basis. Number two, there's strength in being kind of in a dialogue among the generations. And number three, not only do I get strength from studying with my contemporaries, not only do I get strength from studying with ancients, our forebears, but she talks about how the ancient pages of the Talmud provide such a helpful lens for the headlines of today's world. It gives you insight and strength. Now, here's my question to you. I mean, I love that. Of course, I love that. Here's my question to you. Is that enough? Or put it this way, if we all were to study Daf Yomi every day, we're going to commit to studying a page of Talmud, which is actually 2 pages of Talmud, it's front and back, every day for the next 7.5 years. Let's say we did that. Let's say we met every day at 9:30, and in 1 hour we studied the page, namely 2 pages of Talmud, and 7.5 years later, the 48 or 50 or 52 of us completed the entire Shas, the entire Talmudic universe. Here's my question. What's the impact? Did that change our world, or did that change the world? Did it change our world, or did it change the world? What's the impact of doing that? I'd love new voices. I would love, can I just get some new voices? People who haven't shared yet, I want to just get some, anyone who has not yet had an opportunity to share, who would like to share. What do you think about that move? And does it change only your world? You now know more stuff and it's cool to study Talmud. Are you changing the actual world when you study Talmud every day? Anybody want to tackle that one? And if not, I'm happy to get some of our voices who have already shared, but I just want to make sure everyone who wishes to speak gets a chance to speak. Okay, Dottie. And Dottie, if you can unmute, please.
Yes. My feeling is that as a Jew, we know all these horrific things, our history, and I think that by studying for 7 years, it would warm my heart and make me more knowledgeable about our history, our studies, but I don't think it'll change the world. The only thing, if we go out, and Jews are not supposed to, what is the word? They do not proselytize. Like other religions. I think this something like that is for your inner self. And you believe and you know. I found this book shocking. I knew a lot of things. I knew Shakespeare, but I never looked at it the way that she presented it. This is something, this book. And I must tell you, any other book that you have recommended, it's taken a week or whatever to get it from Amazon. This was at my house in 12 hours when I ordered it. Now, I don't know if that means it's not making the bestseller high list. I read the bestseller list and I've never seen it.
Right.
Is this, I'd like to know.
I can't speak to that, but Dottie, I take your critique of her response to be, it helps us, it makes us feel better, but how does it change the world? It changes our world, not the world. Other views on that, Maddie? Maddie, no?
1 second. I totally agree with Dottie. I would have said exactly, I don't know if I would have said it as articulately as you did, Dottie, but I agree. But I think what's going to change the world and what we need to start doing is what Governor Baker did last week. Governor Baker signed a bill mandating that genocide education in schools happen. And he did this in response to what just happened in Duxbury and in other towns in Massachusetts. And he very clearly talks about not just the behavior against Blacks, but incidences of hate and anti-Semitism are on the rise. And that school systems, that individual school systems now need to take on facing history or whatever the curriculums are to teach about hate. Unfortunately, we live in a bubble here in Massachusetts, but it has to happen all over the country. And our legislators have to have the courage to take a stand and say this has got to stop and not make excuses for it.
Yeah. So I think to me, it's a yes and. That is to say, it's good to study so we know more and feel more and get more strength. But I want to call up Paul Kalis's comment last week, which is that it's not enough for the Jewish community to go deeper. We have to build bridges with non-Jews to make a difference and study. And I think about how our group read Caste. What made reading Caste so helpful was studying it with a Black American community, the bridge building. And I think that the way forward is Daf Yomi is lovely and learning Torah is lovely and getting in dialogue with current people and ancient people and new lenses for our old lenses for our current issues. All that is great, but it doesn't change the world until we actually study with people who are outside our own world.
But that's the point, Wes. That's the
Yeah.
point about this curriculum. This is
Yes.
in public schools with a variety of children who may have never even had contact with minority groups
Right.
in parts of Massachusetts. But as I said, we're in a bubble. And
Yeah.
if this could happen elsewhere, and if he could spread this, it would be a wonderful thing.
I will just say, I always love ending not with a bow and a wrapper and a ribbon. I always love ending messy, because messy is actually the world. This kind of interfaith work or interracial work or different communities working together work, it's really good and it's really hard. And it's really hard to sustain. So it's important work. And I just want to note that actually, because, you know, Maddie, you talk about living in a bubble. Every person lives in their own zip code. And every person is most comfortable in their own zip code. And the key to changing the world is getting out of our zip code and working with other people who are in their zip code and figuring out how to actually do life together in a way that's organic and intuitive and sustainable. There are some, you know, I remember, you know, when our kids go off to college, that's the great melting pot, and they meet lots of people, but very often people revert to the communities of people they're familiar with, even in college. So I think it's really hard to stay in the kind of bridge building that would change the world, but certainly Daf Yomi is a good place to start. Susan Tregerman, we're going to give you the last word.
Let me unmute. There we go. Hi, I left my bubble. I raised my family in Long Island, New York. My brother is a part of your congregation, as I mentioned before. And I left my bubble to join my family, my kids in Seattle, which is a whole different beeswax. And I work for the Hebrew Free Loan Association now too. But that's an aside, because the aside is they just formed a Jewish Community Relations Council in Seattle. There's never been any organization to interact with other faiths. They're creating their mission statement now that they want all these other Jewish organizations to sign on with. There is a dot of mention of addressing anti-Semitism in it, which I found, which has been quite controversial in our organization as we're discussing it now, deciding whether to sign on to this document. But I found that horrific. So I'm not sure where Jews' heads are out here. And it upsets me greatly. But on another note, and talking about the unity, in the 7 years that I am out here, when I first got here, you could not find in a shop, in a store, anywhere, other than the synagogue, Jewish paraphernalia, Hanukkahs, dreidels. Now you find, as the young Jewish population has changed, because there are jobs here in the tech industry. There's not where I live, but there's a large Israeli population here out in Washington, sort of towards Microsoft land. You find that you can find these items in stores. Target has, Walmart, these big corporations have brought it out here. Even the supermarkets now have more Jewish Israeli products or Jewish foods. Of course, you know, there's matzah or matzah on Hanukkah. They don't quite get it right.
Well, but, Susan, thank you for doing this good work in Seattle.
But I just wanted to add that there's more young Jews also creating public awareness of Jewish life. There were so many community outdoor Hanukkah celebrations this year, never existed 7 years ago. So maybe studying together, when they're here, they want to be together, and they're putting themselves out there. Just to stop me. That's why I wanted to make that connection. Sorry.
You're not good, Susan. So thank you. So I think just to end like our Haftarahs end on an uptick note, I think there's three things that we could do that are hopeful and helpful. the 3 points of spiritual homework that come from this book. One is just to read this book and know about this book, because I just speaking for myself, I didn't know a lot of the stuff in this book. I mean, I knew that Merchant of Venice was problematic. I didn't know how problematic. I didn't know the context. Basically, every chapter was just chock full of stuff. I think reading People Love Dead Jews is essential for our time. Second, I think that Daf Yomi, or some version of that, some learning beyond just People Love Dead Jews, just Jewish centering and grounding in our ancient text, and doing that with a community. And of course, in the pandemic, there's so many ways to do it in so many communities, and anybody is a click away from any community. But just continued Jewish learning is really important. And then I do think the third piece is, how do we get out of our world to the world? And that for me personally has always been the hardest piece. I mean, I know like Rabbi Chill was just a master of interfaith work. It's the master of interfaith work. And you know, my colleagues and I have tried some of that, but it's much harder for me. But I think being able to get out of our zip code into somebody else's zip code and to work with and to build bridges with, I think that's just so essential, especially now. So thank you guys for this conversation. By the way, we're doing a TE Reads on this book Thursday night at 8 o'clock. This Thursday night at 8 o'clock. I just think this book is so important. I want to end by asking, just by a quick show of hands, how many people would like one more class? It would be, what I would do is I would actually teach some of the Talmud that Dara Horn brings in the last chapter as an example of a healing text. And I could bring some of those Talmudic texts to us next week. If you would like to do that class, let me just see a show of hands. And if not, that's more than okay as well. Okay, so it seems like we have a critical mass. So we'll have one more class before the December break next week. And next week, what I'll do just as a bridge class is take the Talmudic text that she talked about, and I'll send that out later this week, and we'll study them next Tuesday. Thank you guys so much. Happy day after Hanukkah. See you next Tuesday. All the best. Bye.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Great book, great book. Thank you for selecting it.
You.